She stood at the edge of the broken wagon wheel, hands shaking when the first rider's shadow crossed the dirt road behind her, and a voice she'd never heard before said low and rough, "Ma'am, you shouldn't be out here alone." Amelia Carter turned chin lifted, wrench still gripped tight in her palm. "I'm not like other women," she said. "I don't need protecting." The stranger's eyes narrowed on her unreadable dangerous. And somewhere behind that unreadable stare, something shifted. "That's exactly," he said quietly, "why I need to know you." Before we go any further into Amelia and Ethan's story, if you're the kind of person who believes real love isn't about being rescued, it's about being understood, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and I want to know how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to where it began. The people of Blackwater Creek had 100 different ways of saying the same thing about Amelia Carter, and none of them were kind. She was too stubborn, too outspoken, too educated for her own good. The women at the mercantile lowered their voices when she walked past, not because they respected her, but because they didn't know what else to do with a woman who didn't apologize for herself. The men tipped their hats out of habit, not respect. And more than one had told her outright that she'd end up old and alone if she didn't learn to soften herself for a husband. Amelia had stopped flinching at those words a long time ago. At 27, she had spent most of her life being told who she should become, and most of her life quietly refusing. Her father had never once asked her to be anyone but herself, while other girls in town learned needlework and hosting. Amelia sat beside him at the ledger desk of Carter's trading post, learning columns and totals, learning how a business survived and how it died. He taught her to read a contract line by line twice, because men who wrote contracts counted on women not reading them at all. "The day you stop asking questions," he used to tell her, "is the day someone starts taking advantage of you." She never stopped asking questions. She learned to repair a wagon axle before she learned to dance. She could ride bareback through the ravines outside town faster than any of the boys who used to tease her for it. She negotiated freight prices with men twice her age and left them blinking, unsure how they'd lost the exchange. And when someone, usually a man, usually smiling in that particular way that expected her to shrink, told her she ought to try harder to be like other women, she gave them the same 6 words every time. "I'm not like other women." She said it like armor. She said it like a wall. What she never let anyone see was what stood behind that wall. Because being different in a place like Blackwater Creek came with a cost nobody wrote down in any ledger. Respect she had. People trusted her word, trusted her numbers, trusted her hands to fix what was broken. But trust wasn't the same as being wanted. Being admired from a careful distance wasn't the same as being loved up close. At night, in the small room above the trading post that had been her father's before it was hers, she sometimes let herself wonder what it would feel like to stop proving something. Just once. To be enough without having to demonstrate it. She never let herself wonder for long. Her father died in the spring, quietly in his sleep, the same way he'd lived without asking anyone for anything. And in his will, written in his own steady hand, he left her 2 things: the trading post in the town of Willow Ridge, 3 days' ride from Blackwater Creek, and a single line that she read so many times, the paper had begun to soften at the fold. "You were never the wrong kind of woman. The world was just too slow to catch up to you." She packed the wagon herself, loaded the crates herself, turned down her uncle's offer to send one of his hired men along for her own good, because she had heard that phrase her whole life and had learned exactly what it usually meant, not protection, but control dressed up as kindness. "I'll manage," she told him. "Amelia, it's 3 days through open country." "I know the country. It's not the country I'm worried about." She didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. A woman traveling alone was an invitation in the eyes of certain men, and she had spent her whole life being underestimated by exactly that kind of man. She would rather take her chances with the road than spend 3 days pretending to need an escort she didn't. The first 2 days went exactly as she'd planned. Clear skies, good ground, the horses steady beneath her, the trading post ledgers wrapped in oilcloth in the back of the wagon, along with the last of her father's letters. the ones she hadn't been able to make herself burn or keep properly filed, so they simply rode along with her, unresolved the way grief does. It was the third day when everything went wrong. The trail narrowed into a canyon pass an hour before sundown, the kind of stretch where the walls rose up close on either side and the light dropped fast, like someone had pulled a curtain. The wagon hit a rut she hadn't seen hidden under a drift of loose shale, and the front wheel cracked with a sound like a gunshot. The wagon lurched. Amelia grabbed the rail hard enough to bruise her palm, and the horses spooked sidestepping, nearly dragging the whole rig into the ditch before she hauled the reins tight and got them still. For a moment she just sat there, heart-slamming sweat cold on the back of her neck. Then she climbed down to look. The wheel wasn't just cracked. 2 spokes had shattered clean through, and the iron rim had bent enough that it wouldn't turn true even if she managed a temporary fix. She crouched in the dirt, ran her fingers along the splinters, and felt something in her chest that she refused to name as fear. She was 3 days from Blackwater Creek, still the better part of a day from Willow Ridge, alone on a canyon trail with the sun sliding fast behind the rock walls, and no one who knew exactly where she was. "All right," she said out loud, mostly to steady her own voice. "All right, think." She had tools. She had a spare length of iron strap in the toolbox her father had packed for her without her asking. Of course he had. He'd always known she'd need it, even when she insisted she wouldn't. She had 2 hours of daylight left, maybe less. She got to work. She was still on her knees in the dirt, wrench in hand, sweat sticking her hair to her temple when she heard the horses. Not her horses, others. 3 of them coming down the canyon trail from the direction she'd already traveled, moving at an easy pace that somehow felt worse than if they'd been galloping. Amelia's hand found the wrench, again gripped it tighter than a tool has any right to be gripped, and she stood putting the broken wagon at her back. The men who came around the bend were not what she'd hoped for. 3 riders, dust-covered, the kind of men who wore their hats low, not for the sun, but for the shade it gave their eyes. The one in front reined up first, looking her over slow, the way a man looks over livestock he's deciding whether to bid on. "Well now," he said, "ain't every day we find a woman broke down out here all by her lonesome." "I'm not broken down," Amelia said. "I'm repairing my wagon. There's a difference." The man smiled, and it didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "That's so." The 2 behind him didn't dismount. One of them spat into the dirt and said something low to the other that made them both laugh, and Amelia felt the sound of that laugh crawl straight down her spine. "You got a name?" the lead rider asked. "I don't see that it's your business." "Everything out here's my business, ma'am. Lonely stretch of road." He swung down off his horse, slow, unhurried, and Amelia's grip on the wrench turned white-knuckled. Man could get real curious about a woman traveling alone with a wagon full of goods. "The wagon's empty," she lied. "Trading post supplies already sold." "Funny," he said, stepping closer. "Because I heard Carter's girl was coming through with a full load heading for Willow Ridge to take over her daddy's post." His eyes flicked to hers, and something cold settled behind them. "Reckon that's you." Amelia went very still. "You know who I am." "Everybody round these parts knows the name Carter." He tilted his head. "Especially fellas who work for Mr. Whitfield." The name meant nothing to her, and everything in his tone told her it should have. "Who's Whitfield?" "Man who's real interested in that land your daddy left you," the rider said. "Man who don't much care for a woman sitting on a deed he's already made plans for." He took another step close enough now that she could smell the whiskey and horse sweat on him. "Might be easier for everybody if you just kept on riding. Past Willow Ridge. Past all of it." "That land belonged to my father," Amelia said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "It's mine now, legally. There's nothing to discuss." "There's always something to discuss." His hand closed around her wrist before she saw it coming, wrenching the tool from her grip and tossing it aside into the dirt like it was nothing. Especially with a woman who don't know when to be scared. Amelia's pulse roared in her ears, but she didn't step back, didn't look away. "Let go of me, Or what? That was the exact moment the fourth rider came around the bend behind them and everything changed. He didn't announce himself. He didn't call out a warning. He simply rode into the clearing at a pace that made all three men turn, and something about the way he sat his horse, easy and unbothered, made even the lead rider's grip on Amelia's wrist go slack. "Evenin'?" the newcomer said like he'd stumbled onto nothing more than a friendly gathering. But his eyes weren't friendly at all. They moved once fast, taking in Amelia's face. Her wrist still caught in the other man's hand, the wrench thrown into the dirt, and something in his jaw went tight. "This ain't your business, Walker," the lead rider said. So he had a name, Ethan Walker, and they knew him, and they didn't much like knowing him. "Funny," Ethan said, swinging down off his horse without any particular hurry, though Amelia noticed his hand never strayed far from his side. "I was under the impression that a man putting his hands on a woman who's told him to let go is everybody's business. We're just talking." Didn't look like talking from where I was sitting. The lead rider's jaw worked. He glanced at his two companions who hadn't moved, hadn't spoken clearly, waiting to see which way this would go before committing to anything. "You want to start something out here, Walker, over some woman you don't even know?" "Don't need to know her," Ethan said. "To know a man shouldn't be grabbing her wrist like she's cattle." His voice hadn't risen at all, and somehow that was worse, more final, than if he'd shouted. "Let go of her arm." For a long moment, nobody moved. Amelia stood frozen between them, wrist still trapped, feeling the tension stretch tight enough to snap, and then slowly the man's fingers loosened, and her arm was free. She stepped back immediately, putting distance between herself and all three riders, rubbing at the raw mark already rising on her skin. "Tell Whitfield," Ethan said, "that if his men can't ride through this county without harassing women on the road, he can find himself some new men." "This ain't over," the lead rider muttered, swinging back up onto his horse. "Wasn't planning on it being," Ethan said evenly, "but it's over for today." The three riders turned their horses and rode back the way they'd come, and Amelia watched them go until the sound of hooves faded into the canyon silence, and only then did she let herself breathe. "You all right?" Ethan asked. She turned to look at him properly for the first time, tall, weathered in the way men got from years of sun and hard work rather than age. A stillness to him that felt less like calm and more like something held very carefully in place. "I'm fine," she said, and heard how thin her own voice sounded. "You don't look fine." "I said I'm fine." The words came out sharper than she meant them, pride snapping back into place like a shield she'd nearly dropped. She bent down and retrieved the wrench from the dirt, gripping it again, grounding herself in the familiar weight of it. "I had it handled." Something flickered across his face, not quite a smile, not quite disbelief. 3 armed men and a busted wagon wheel. "That your definition of handled?" "I was working on the wheel before they showed up." "And the 3 men?" "I would have managed." He studied her for a long moment, and Amelia had the distinct uncomfortable feeling of being read like a ledger. Every column, every total, every place where the numbers didn't quite add up to what she was claiming. "You always this stubborn?" he asked. "Or is today special?" "I'm not like other women," she said, and it came out from pure habit, before she could stop it, the same 6 words she'd used 1,000 times as armor. Ethan's eyebrows lifted slightly. "No," he said. "Reckon you're not." Something about the way he said it, not mocking, not doubtful, just quietly certain, caught her off guard enough that she didn't have a response ready. He crouched down beside the wagon wheel, running his hand along the broken spokes, much the way she had, and let out a low breath. "This ain't getting fixed tonight. Not out here. I have a spare strap. That'll hold it crooked for maybe a mile before it snaps again, and it'll snap somewhere worse than here." He looked up at her. "My ranch is 20 minutes that way. I've got a wheelwright works for me tools, a barn with a roof on it. You can get this fixed proper in the morning and be back on the road by noon." Amelia's instinct, old, well-worn automatic, was to refuse. She had learned never to depend on a stranger's kindness, because kindness so often came with strings nobody mentioned until it was too late to cut them. I appreciate the offer, she said, but I'll manage on my own. Ma'am, the sun's near gone. You got a busted wheel, no shelter, and 3 men who now know exactly who you are and where you're headed. His voice stayed level, no pressure in it, just plain fact, laid out like a hand of cards. I'm not trying to talk you into anything you don't want. I'm telling you what's true. Amelia looked at the canyon walls, at the light dying fast overhead, at the wagon wheel that was, if she was honest with herself, well beyond anything a strap of iron could fix tonight. I don't need saving, she said quietly, and it wasn't quite a refusal anymore. It was something closer to a confession. Ethan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Didn't say you did. He stood brushing dirt from his knees. I said you need a barn and a wheelwright. Ain't the same thing as needin' savin'. She almost smiled. Almost. Fine, she said. One night. One night, he agreed. He helped her unhitch the horses from the broken wagon. She noticed he asked, before touching anything, waited for her nod before he moved, and she noticed herself noticing that, filing it away, the way she filed everything, cautious and precise. They left the wagon itself where it stood wheelside propped against a boulder, and rode the rest of the way with her mounted on one of the freed horses, and Ethan riding just ahead, setting an easy pace, checking back over his shoulder more than once like he expected her to vanish if he looked away too long. They hadn't gone far when the wind shifted and Amelia felt the temperature drop hard enough to raise gooseflesh on her arms. Overhead, the last strip of orange light was swallowed by a wall of gray cloud rolling in fast from the west. Storm, Ethan said more to himself than to her, and nudged his horse into a faster clip. Wasn't supposed to move in till mornin'. It never asks permission, Amelia said, and he glanced back at her with something that might have been the beginning of a real smile. The first fat drops of rain hit just as the ranch house came into view, low sturdy lantern light already glowing gold in 2 of the windows, smoke rising from the chimney into the darkening sky. It was, Amelia thought, despite herself, the kind of place that looked like it had been built by someone who intended to stay, not someone passing through. A man came out onto the porch as they rode up, older, weather-carved, wiping his hands on a rag. He took one look at Amelia, and then a longer look at Ethan, his expression shifting into something guarded. "Who's this?" the man asked. "Miss Carter," Ethan said, swinging down off his horse. "Wagon wheels busted out on the canyon road. She'll stay the night, head out in the morning once Samuel's fixed it." The older man's eyes narrowed just slightly, just enough that Amelia caught it. "Carter," he repeated. "As in the trading post, Carter." "That's right," Amelia said, lifting her chin, already bracing for whatever came next. "Huh." The man looked at Ethan again, something unspoken passing between them, and then he turned and went back inside without another word. "That's Cole," Ethan said, like it explained anything at all. "Foreman. He's not much for talking to strangers. He knew my name," Amelia said, before I said it. "Word travels." "What kind of word?" Ethan didn't answer right away, and the silence told her more than any answer would have. He led her horse toward the barn instead, and she followed, feeling the first real prickle of unease she'd felt since the storm rolled in, not from the weather this time. Inside, out of the rain, a young man with sawdust on his sleeves came forward to take the horses, and Ethan gave him quiet instructions about the wagon, about first light, about the wheel. Amelia stood near the barn door, arms wrapped around herself, watching rain streak down in silver lines past the lantern light, and tried to piece together what Cole's reaction had meant. "You gonna tell me," she said when Ethan came back to her side, "why your foreman looked at me like I was trouble walking in the door?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, weighing something. "Whitfield's been trying to buy up land along the Willow Ridge Road for near a year now," he said finally. "Mine included. He's made offers 3 times. I've turned him down 3 times. Amelia felt something cold settle in her stomach. "And my father's trading post sits right on that road, right at the crossing point from what I understand. Whoever controls that land controls the freight route into Willow Ridge." He met her eyes. "Man like Whitfield doesn't like being told no. Not by me, not by anybody." "So those men on the canyon road weren't an accident," Ethan said. "I'd bet my ranch on it. Amelia's mind raced back through everything her uncle's warning about the road. The strange insistence that she take an escort, the timing of the wheel breaking in a spot with no witnesses. She had told herself it was bad luck. Now she wasn't sure luck had anything to do with it. "I need to get inside," Ethan said, seeing something shift in her face. "You're soaked through, and you look like you're about to fall over. Whatever Whitfield wants, it isn't gonna get solved standing in a barn at midnight." He was right, and she hated that he was right, and she followed him toward the house anyway, because there was nothing else sensible to do. Inside the ranch house was plain but warm, a fire already burning low in the front room, and Ethan poured coffee into 2 tin cups, without asking if she wanted any, setting one down in front of her at the table, like it was simply understood. "Thank you," she said, and meant it, and hated a little that she meant it, because gratitude felt dangerously close to dependence, and she had spent her whole life avoiding both. "You don't have to thank me for coffee. I'm not used to people doing things for me without wanting something back." Something crossed his face, not offense, but recognition, like she'd said something that landed closer to home than she knew. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know that feeling." She studied him over the rim of her cup. "You gonna tell me what that means, or is that a story for another night?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer at all. "I was engaged once," he said finally. "Long time ago, woman named Sarah. We were gonna build this ranch together. That was the whole plan, the whole reason I bought this land in the first place." His jaw tightened just slightly. "She died of fever second winter, after we got here. Ranch was already half built. Didn't see much reason to stop, so I finished it. Just finished it alone." "I'm sorry," Amelia said, and she meant that too. "It was a long time ago. That doesn't mean it stopped mattering." He looked at her, then really looked in a way that made her feel suddenly unaccountably seen. Not looked over, not assessed, just seen the way she'd wanted to be seen her whole life, and had learned to stop expecting. "No," he said. "It doesn't." The fire popped in the silence between them. Outside, the storm hammered steady against the windows, and Amelia found herself in no particular hurry to end the conversation, which was in itself unfamiliar enough to unsettle her. "Why'd you stop him?" she asked. "Today, on the road. You didn't know me. Wasn't your fight." "Man puts his hands on a woman who told him not to," Ethan said. "It's my fight whether I know her or not." "That's not the only reason." His mouth curved just barely. "No," he admitted. "Guess it isn't." "Then what's the rest of it?" He set his cup down slow, like he was deciding how much of the truth to hand her. "You were kneeling in the dirt fixing that wheel yourself before those men ever showed up," he said. "Most folks, man or woman, would have been sitting there waiting for somebody to come along and save 'em. You were already working the problem." He shook his head slightly. "Don't see that much. Figured it was worth stopping for." Amelia didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and the silence between them stretched out comfortable instead of strained, which was its own kind of surprise. "You should sleep," Ethan said eventually. "Long day tomorrow, getting that wheel sorted, getting you back on the road." "I don't want to be a burden on your household." "You're not." He stood banking the fire down for the night. "Cole'll grumble about it. Cole grumbles about everything. Don't mean anything by it." She followed him down a short hallway to a small guest room, plain but clean, a quilt folded at the foot of the bed that looked hand-stitched careful. He paused at the door. "Amelia," he said the first time he'd used her given name, and it landed somewhere in her chest she didn't examine too closely. "Whatever Whitfield's planning, you're not facing it alone tomorrow. I don't care what your daddy's trading post looks like on a deed. Nobody rides into a woman's life with 3 armed men and gets to call that a fair fight. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Walker." "Didn't say I owed you anything." His eyes held hers, steady, unshakable, in a way that made something in her chest go tight and unfamiliar. "Said I wasn't letting it happen." She wanted to argue. It was instinct reflex, the same wall she'd built her whole life out of the same 6 words. "I'm not like other women. I don't need help. I don't need anyone." But standing there, rain hammering the roof wrist, still faintly aching from a stranger's grip. Warmth from a fire she hadn't built herself still clinging to her skin, she found for the first time in longer than she could remember that she didn't reach for the wall at all. "Good night, Mr. Walker," she said instead. "Ethan," he corrected softly. "Good night, Amelia." He turned to go and stopped just before the doorway, like something had caught in his throat that needed saying before the night closed over it. "For what it's worth," he said, not quite turning around. "I meant what I told that man on the road. You're not the kind of trouble Whitfield thinks you are." "What kind am I then?" Ethan looked back at her, and there was something quiet and certain in his face that she would think about long after the lantern was out and the storm had rolled on past the ranch and into the dark hills beyond. "The kind," he said, "a man doesn't come across twice in a lifetime." He left before she could answer, and Amelia sat alone in the borrowed room, listening to the rain, to the fading sound of his boots down the hall, and thought for the first time since her father's death. For the first time in longer than that maybe Willow Ridge wasn't the only thing waiting for her at the end of this road. Maybe something else had already found her first. And 3 days' ride away in an office lit by lamplight, a man named Whitfield sat reading a telegram his men had sent from the canyon road, his jaw tight with fury at the news that Carter's daughter hadn't been alone after all, and that Ethan Walker, of all men in the territory, had put himself squarely between Whitfield and the land he intended to have. He crumpled the telegram slowly in one fist. "Then we do this the harder way," he said to the empty room, and reached for a fresh sheet of paper and began carefully to write. The letter left Whitfield's office before dawn, carried by a rider who didn't ask what was inside it and knew better than to. By the time the sun cleared the ridge above the Walker Ranch, 3 new plans were already in motion, and not one of them involved anything as simple as another attempt on the canyon road. Amelia woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of hammering coming from the barn, steady and rhythmic. And for one disoriented moment, she forgot where she was. Then it came back to her, the broken wheel, the storm. The man who'd told her she wasn't the kind of trouble anyone forgot. She dressed quickly and found Cole already at the stove, scowling at a pot like it had personally wronged him. "Walker's out with Samuel," he said without turning around. "Wheel's near done. You'll be back on the road by midday like he promised." "You don't have to sound so pleased about it." Cole turned then, and there was nothing playful in his face. "Ma'am, I got no quarrel with you personal, but I've worked this ranch 9 years, and in 9 years I ain't seen Whitfield's men ride this close to Walker land unless they were looking to start something." He set a cup down in front of her, harder than necessary. "Yesterday they found something worth riding for. They found me. They found the Carter name," Cole said, "which is the same thing as finding trouble, far as Whitfield's concerned." Amelia wrapped both hands around the cup, more to steady herself than to warm them. "Tell me what you know, Cole. All of it. I'm not a woman who does well with half a story." He studied her a long moment, the same measuring look he'd given her the night before, and something in it shifted, not quite trust, but the beginning of it. 2 years back, Whitfield tried to buy the old Hargrove spread east of here, Cole said. Hargrove wouldn't sell. Month later, Hargrove's barn burned to the ground, and a week after that, Hargrove sold cheap and fast and never said another word about it to anybody before he left the territory. He held her eyes. "Ain't proof of nothin'. Ain't never proof of nothin' with a man like that. But I've buried enough coincidences on this land to know what they smell like." Amelia felt something cold settle low in her stomach. "You think he means to do the same to me?" "I think," Cole said, "that you're sitting on the one piece of land between here and Willow Ridge he doesn't already control, and men like Whitfield don't much care for holes in a map." The barn door swung open before she could answer, and Ethan came in with sawdust on his sleeves and a look on his face that told her he'd heard at least the tail end of the conversation. "Wheels fixed," he said. "Samuel reinforced the spokes, doubled case you hit rough ground again." He glanced at Cole, some silent exchange passing between them, and then back to Amelia. "I'm riding with you to Willow Ridge." "That's not necessary." "Wasn't asking." "Mr. Walker." "Ethan," he corrected again, patient but immovable. "And I wasn't asking your permission, Amelia. I was telling you what's happening. You can argue with me the whole ride if it makes you feel better, but I'm not letting you travel that last stretch of road alone after yesterday." She wanted to argue anyway, purely on principle, because independence was the one thing she'd never learned to set down, even when it made no sense to keep carrying it. But some new and unfamiliar part of her, the part that had lain awake the night before, turning his words over like a coin she couldn't stop checking, for the value stamped on the other side, didn't actually want to argue at all. "Fine," she said, "but I'm paying for your time." Something almost like a smile pulled at his mouth. "You can pay me in coffee once we get there. I hear the Carter Trading Post makes decent coffee." "The Carter Trading Post," she said, "hasn't opened its doors in 3 months. Then I reckon we've got work to do." Tag. The ride to Willow Ridge took most of the morning, the reinforced wheel holding steady under them, and somewhere in the second hour, Amelia noticed that the silence between her and Ethan had stopped feeling like something that needed filling. He didn't press her with questions. He didn't fill the quiet with talk, just to hear himself talk. He rode beside her easy in the saddle, glancing over now and then, like he was simply making sure she was still there. And each time he did, something in her chest gave a small traitorous lurch she refused to name. "You're staring," she said finally, not looking at him. Wasn't staring, was checking. Checking for what? Whether you were gonna fall off that horse from being up half the night thinking. Her head turned sharply. "How would you know I was up half the night?" "Saw the lamp under your door past midnight." He shrugged, unbothered. "Wasn't spying. Couldn't sleep myself." "Why couldn't you sleep?" He was quiet a moment, eyes on the road ahead. "Same reason you couldn't, probably." She didn't ask him to explain that. She didn't need to. The air between them had changed since the storm, subtle but unmistakable, like a door left slightly open that neither of them had decided yet whether to walk through. They crested the last rise before Willow Ridge a little past noon, and the town spread out below them, small and dusty and entirely unremarkable, until Amelia's eyes found the trading post at the center of it, and every ounce of quiet contentment in her chest turned to ice. The front window was shattered. The door hung open on one hinge. "Ethan." "I see it." His voice had gone flat, all the ease drained out of it in an instant, replaced by something hard and alert. He kicked his horse into a faster pace, and Amelia followed, heart slamming, praying it was nothing. A storm, an accident, anything but what her instincts were already screaming at her that it was. It was not nothing. Amelia swung down before her horse had fully stopped and ran through the broken doorway, and the sight that met her stole the breath clean out of her lungs. The shelves had been swept bare, goods scattered and trampled across the floor. The counter where her father had stood for 20 years had been overturned. And the small back office, the room that held the ledgers, the deed, every scrap of paper that proved this land was hers, had been torn apart, drawers pulled out and dumped, papers scattered like a windstorm had passed through with intent. "No," Amelia whispered, dropping to her knees among the wreckage hands moving fast and desperate over torn papers. "No, no." "Amelia." Ethan crouched beside her. Steady, even now, a hand resting light on her shoulder. "What are you looking for?" "The deed. My father's deed. It has to be here. It was in the strongbox. It was—" Her hand stilled over an empty metal box lid, wrenched open, lock broken clean off. Empty. She stared at it like it might change if she looked long enough. "It's gone. Maybe he moved it. Maybe he didn't move it." Amelia's voice cracked, and she hated the sound of it, hated how thin and frightened it came out. "I watched him put it in this box myself 3 weeks before he died. It was here. Someone took it." Ethan's jaw tightened, and for a moment he said nothing at all, just looked around the wrecked office with the same cold, assessing focus she'd seen in him on the canyon road right before he'd told 3 armed men to let go of her arm. "This wasn't robbery," he said finally. "Robbery's fast. Robbery grabs what's valuable and runs. This," he gestured at the systematic destruction drawer by drawer, shelf by shelf. "This was somebody looking for something specific, and they found it. The deed proves the land is mine," Amelia said, her mind racing now, fear curdling fast into something sharper. Without it, it's your word against whoever decides to challenge your claim. Ethan's eyes met hers grim. And I'd bet every head of cattle I own that Whitfield already knows exactly what's missing from that box. A voice came from the doorway before Amelia could answer. Miss Carter. She turned to find an older woman standing in the broken frame, wringing her hands, eyes darting nervously between Amelia and Ethan. I saw the wagon come in. Wanted to make sure heavens is everyone all right. Mrs. Dawes, Amelia said, recognizing the woman who ran the boarding house 2 doors down. What happened here when 3 nights passed, Mrs. Dawes said, lowering her voice like the walls themselves might be listening. Heard glass breaking round midnight. By the time anybody worked up the nerve to look, whoever did it was long gone. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder like she expected to be overheard. There's talk in town, Miss Carter. Ugly talk. What kind of talk? That your daddy owed money he never paid. That the land's not rightly yours to claim at all. Mrs. Dawes's eyes flicked toward Ethan, wary of him, too wary of everything. Mr. Whitfield's been in town twice this week, talking to the council, saying he's got paper to prove it. Amelia felt the floor tilt beneath her, though she hadn't moved an inch. That's a lie. My father never owed Whitfield a cent in his life. I'm only telling you what's being said, Mrs. Dawes said, apologetic and frightened in equal measure. Whitfield's got money, Miss Carter, and money talks louder than truth in this town, more's the pity. She wrung her hands once more and retreated back through the broken door, clearly wanting no further part of whatever was coming. Silence settled over the wrecked office once she'd gone. Amelia sat back on her heels amid the scattered papers, and for the first time since the wagon wheel had cracked on the canyon road, she felt something dangerously close to despair clawing up through her chest. They're going to say I have no claim, she said quietly. No deed, no proof. Just my word against a man with money enough to buy whatever proof he wants. Not while I'm standing here, they won't. Ethan, this isn't your fight. Said that already back on the canyon road, he said, and there was something fierce beneath the calm, now something that made her look up at him properly. Wasn't true then either. He held out a hand and helped her to her feet amid the wreckage. Your father kept a ledger, didn't he? Recorded the property? The transactions, everything. Yes, but where? Amelia's mind raced back, sorting frantically through memory. He kept a second set, a private ledger separate from the store accounts, personal records, land purchase taxes paid, everything documented. Her breath caught. He didn't keep it here. He never trusted keeping everything in one place. He always said a man who keeps all his eggs where anyone can find them deserves what happens to him. Where then? Blackwater Creek, she said slowly, the pieces falling into place even as she spoke them. There's a strong box at the bank there under the trading post's business name. I have the key. Her hand went instinctively to the small brass key she wore on a cord beneath her collar, one she'd worn every day since her father's funeral, without quite knowing why she couldn't bring herself to take it off. If the deed's gone, the ledger's the only other proof I have that this land is legally mine. Then that's where we go. That's 3 days back the way we came. Then we'd best get moving, Ethan said, already turning toward the door, before Whitfield finishes building whatever lie he's planning to hand the town council. They didn't make it 3 steps before a new voice cut across the wreckage, sharp, cold, entirely too pleased with itself. Trouble, Miss Carter? Amelia turned to find a man standing in the broken doorway, well-dressed in a way that felt deliberately out of place against the dust and ruin of the frontier town, his smile the kind that never once touched his eyes. Mr. Whitfield, I presume, she said, voice flat. You presume correctly. He stepped inside, boots crunching over broken glass, surveying the ruined office with an expression of practiced sympathy that fooled absolutely no one. Terrible business, this. Willow Ridge has become such an unsafe place for a woman alone. I'm not alone, Amelia said. Whitfield's eyes slid unhurried toward Ethan. So I see. Mr. Walker, I confess I'm surprised to find you so far from your own land defending interests that aren't yours. Funny, Ethan said. I could say the same about you standing in a woman's ransacked store looking awful comfortable about it. Whitfield's smile thinned but held. I merely came to offer my condolences, and given the circumstances. His gaze swept the destruction once more. Perhaps a practical solution. This land carries debts, Miss Carter. Debts your father accrued and never settled before his passing. I'm prepared to be generous. A fair price for the property enough to settle those debts and leave you comfortably able to start fresh somewhere the past won't follow you. There are no debts, Amelia said. My father never borrowed a cent from you or anyone else. I have paper that says otherwise. Then your paper is forged. Something flickered behind Whitfield's calm there, and gone so fast she might have imagined it, except she hadn't, and the small cold flare of satisfaction it gave her told her she'd struck closer to true than he wanted acknowledged. That's a serious accusation, he said softly. So is breaking into a dead man's store and stealing his deed, Amelia shot back. I don't suppose you'd know anything about that either. I know that a woman traveling alone, running a business alone, defending a claim alone, is a woman the world tends to take advantage of, Whitfield said, and for the first time, something genuinely unkind slipped through the polished surface of his voice. I'm simply the first to be honest with you about it, Miss Carter. My offer stands until the end of the week. After that, I'll be forced to pursue the debt through the courts, and I promise you, courts favor documentation, not sentiment. Get out of my store, Amelia said. Whitfield inclined his head unbothered, already turning for the door. He paused at the threshold, glancing back at Ethan with something almost pitying. You're a good man, Walker, from what I hear. Loyal to a fault, but loyalty to a losing cause is still just losing. He tipped his hat, mockingly polite. Do consider stepping back before this gets any messier than it already has. He left without waiting for a response. Boots crunching away over broken glass and scattered goods, and Amelia stood in the wreckage of her father's life's work, shaking with a fury so complete it left no room for the fear that had gripped her only minutes before. He's lying, she said, about everything. I know he is. I believe you, Ethan said. But believing you and proving it to a judge are two different animals, and Whitfield knows the difference better than anybody. He looked at the destroyed office once more, something hardening in his expression. We ride for Blackwater Creek, today. Now if we can manage it, the sooner we've got that ledger in hand, the sooner his paper stops meaning anything. Ethan, your ranch. Cole can run the ranch a few days without me falling apart. Man's been doing it longer than I've owned the place practically. He met her eyes, steady, certain. I'm not leaving you to face this alone, Amelia. Not after what I just watched that man try to do to you, standing in broad daylight, smiling the whole time like he was doing you a favor. She wanted to argue out of habit more than conviction now, but the words wouldn't come. Somewhere between the canyon road and the wreckage of her father's store, she had stopped being entirely certain she wanted to fight him on this. Thank you, she said, instead quiet, and meant it more than she'd meant anything in longer than she could remember. They rode out within the hour, taking only what supplies could be gathered fast, leaving the wrecked trading post boarded up as best they could manage with Mrs. Dawes's nervous promise to keep an eye on it. The road back toward Blackwater Creek stretched long and dust-pale ahead of them, and Amelia rode in silence for the first mile, mind churning through every version of the fight ahead. You've gone quiet, Ethan observed. I'm thinking. About the ledger. About all of it. She glanced at him. My whole life people have told me I take on too much by myself, that I don't know how to let anyone help me. I used to think that was a compliment in disguise, that needing no one meant I was strong. She looked back at the road ahead. Now I'm sitting here realizing that if you hadn't come around that bend yesterday, I might already have lost everything my father built. And I don't know what to do with that. Don't have to do anything with it, Ethan said. Just have to let it be true. That easy. Didn't say it was easy. Said it was true. He looked over at her, something gentle in his face, despite the hard set of his jaw. Being strong enough to fix a wagon wheel yourself, and being too proud to let somebody stand beside you When 3 armed men show up, those aren't the same kind of strength, Amelia. One of 'em's real. The other's just fear wearing a brave face." She didn't answer right away, turning his words over the way she turned over everything careful and thorough. "That's a hard thing to hear from a man I've known 2 days. Didn't say it to be easy. Said it 'cause it's true, and 'cause I think somewhere under all that armor you already know it." They rode on the miles, unspooling beneath them, and somewhere past the 2nd hour, Amelia found herself telling him things she hadn't told anyone about her father, about the years of being told she'd end up alone, about the particular loneliness of being respected by everyone and truly known by no one. Ethan listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer easy comfort or empty reassurance. He just listened the way she'd always wanted someone to listen and never quite found anyone willing to. "Your turn," she said finally, when the sun had begun its long slide toward afternoon. "Tell me about Sarah. Properly this time. Not just the ending." Something crossed his face. Old grief worn smooth at the edges by time, but never fully healed. "She was gentle," he said. "Gentlest person I ever knew. Used to say I worked too hard, worried too much, needed to slow down, and actually live in the life I was building instead of just building it." He paused. "She wasn't wrong. I've spent 8 years since she died proving her right matter-of-fact building a ranch, working the land, and never once stopping long enough to actually live in it. Until now." He glanced at her, something quiet and searching in his eyes. "Starting to feel that way, yeah." The moment stretched warm and unguarded, and Amelia felt her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear or Whitfield or anything on the road ahead of them. It was the sound of hoofbeats, fast, many closing distance, that shattered it apart. "Riders," Ethan said, all softness gone from his voice in an instant, replaced by that same hard alertness from the canyon road. "Coming up fast behind us." Amelia's heart slammed. "Whitfield's men?" "Only one way to find out." Ethan reined his horse around, positioning himself slightly in front of her without seeming to think about it at all, hand resting near his side. "Stay behind me." "Ethan? Amelia, please." The riders came around the bend a moment later, 5 of them this time, more than the day before, moving with a purpose that left no doubt about their intent. Amelia recognized the lead rider from the canyon road, the same cold smile pulling at his mouth as he reined up hard in front of them, dust rising thick around all of them. "Didn't figure you'd be dumb enough to keep traveling with her walker," the man said. "Didn't figure Whitfield'd be dumb enough to send 5 men after 2 people minding their own business," Ethan replied evenly. "Guess we're both surprised today." "Boss wants the ledger. Word is Carter's girl is riding for Blackwater Creek to fetch it." The rider's eyes flicked to Amelia, and his smile widened in a way that made her stomach turn cold. "Figured we'd save everybody the trip." "You figured wrong," Ethan said. "There's 5 of us, Walker. 1 of you." "Math's never been my strong suit," Ethan said, and Amelia caught the barest edge of something dangerous in his voice now, something she hadn't heard from him yet. "But even I know 5 against a man defending what's right ain't the kind of odds that end well for the 5. For a long, taut moment, nobody moved. Amelia's pulse hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat, watching the standoff stretch tighter and tighter, waiting for it to snap. And then from the tree line above the road, a new voice called out, "That's far enough." Every head turned. Cole sat his horse at the ridge line above them, rifle already leveled, and behind him, Amelia's breath caught 3 more ranch hands from Walker's spread, all armed, all utterly unhurried about it. "Followed you out," Cole said to Ethan, not taking his eyes off the riders below. "Figured you might need the company given how the last 2 days have gone." The lead rider's jaw tightened, doing fast arithmetic of his own, now eyes flicking between the men on the ridge and the 2 on the road. "This isn't finished," he said finally, voice tight with the particular fury of a man forced to back down. "Wasn't expecting it to be," Ethan said. "But it's finished for today, same as yesterday." The riders wheeled their horses and rode off in a cloud of dust, and Amelia let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for an hour straight, hands trembling around her reins. "You followed us," she said to Cole as he rode down to join them. Wasn't gonna let the boss ride off into open country with Whitfield's dogs circling, Cole said gruffly, though something almost warm passed behind his eyes when he glanced at her. Reckon that goes for you too, Miss Carter, whether you asked for it or not. Amelia felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Not quite tears, but closed the particular ache of being protected by people who owed her nothing and chose to anyway. Thank you, she said quietly. All of you. Don't thank us yet, Ethan said, watching the dust settle where the riders had disappeared. Whitfield just showed his hand sending 5 men after a ledger. Means he's scared of what's in it. He turned to her, something grim and determined in his face. Means we're closer to the truth than he wants us to be. They reached Blackwasher Creek 2 days later, road-worn and wary Cole, and 2 ranch hands riding escort, the whole way without a single further incident. Though Amelia noticed none of them ever fully relaxed, eyes constantly scanning the tree lines. Hands never far from their weapons. The bank was a squat brick building at the center of town, and the manager, a nervous, balding man named Pruitt, went pale the moment Amelia gave him her name. Miss Carter, he said, voice tight. I wasn't expecting... I need access to my father's strongbox, Amelia said. Account under Carter's trading post. Pruitt's eyes darted toward the door, toward the window, anywhere but her face. I'm afraid that account was closed. Amelia went very still. Closed. By whom? There was paperwork, Pruitt stammered. Proper paperwork, transferring authority. Show me, Ethan said, voice low and dangerous in a way Amelia hadn't heard from him yet. Pruitt's hands shook as he produced a document from beneath the counter, and Amelia snatched it before he could offer further excuse, eyes scanning fast down the page, and her blood ran cold. A transfer of authority. Dated 1 week ago, bearing what appeared to be her father's signature, authorizing the account and its contents to be released to one Jonas Whitfield. This is a forgery, Amelia said, voice shaking now. Fury and fear tangled together too tight to separate. My father has been dead 4 months. He couldn't have signed anything a week ago. The signature matched what we had on file, Pruitt said weakly. I had no reason to suspect. You had every reason, Ethan snapped. Man's been dead 4 months, and you didn't think to ask a single question when somebody walked in claiming his signature. Where's the ledger? Amelia demanded. Where's the strongbox contents now? Pruitt swallowed hard. Mr. Whitfield collected them himself 3 days ago. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Amelia's feet. The deed gone from the trading post. The ledger gone from the bank. Every piece of proof that the land was legally hers systematically stripped away one by one, and always just one step ahead of her arrival. He knew, she whispered. He knew exactly where every piece of proof was kept. He's been planning this for longer than I've even known his name. Amelia. Ethan's hand found her shoulder, grounding her before the panic rising in her chest could fully take hold. This isn't over. A forged signature is a crime, and now we've got a bank manager who'll testify Whitfield walked in here with paper that wasn't real. I don't know that I can testify to that, Pruitt said quickly, fear plain on his face. Mr. Whitfield is a powerful man in this territory, and I have a family, and Miss Carter has a legal claim you just helped steal out from under her. Ethan said, voice hard as iron now. You'll testify to what's true, Pruitt, or I'll make sure every bank examiner in the territory hears exactly how carelessly you're running this branch. Pruitt's face went the color of old parchment, but he nodded, small and reluctant. Outside the bank, Amelia stood in the street, feeling the ground shift beneath everything she thought she understood about the fight ahead of her. He's 3 steps ahead of us, she said. Every single time. Deed ledger, what's left, Ethan? What do I have left to prove any of this land is mine? Ethan was quiet a long moment, and when he spoke there was something new in his voice. Not the calm certainty she'd come to expect from him, but something rawer, more determined. There's still the original land grant, he said slowly. Filed with the territorial office in Helena when your daddy first claimed the property years back, long before Whitfield ever set his sights on this land. Whitfield can steal a deed out of a strongbox. Can't steal a record that's been sittin' in a government archive for 20 years without somebody noticin'. Hope, fragile and unfamiliar, flickered to life in Amelia's chest. You think it's still there? I think it's the one piece of proof he hasn't thought of yet, Ethan said. And I think we need to get to Helena before he does. That's another week's ride. Then we'd best not waste time standing here talking about it. They turned back toward the horses and stopped short at the sight waiting for them in the street. A crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion from the bank, and at the front of it stood three men Amelia recognized from the town council, faces set in expressions of careful, practiced disapproval. Miss Carter. The eldest of them said, a heavy-set man named Garrett, who owned half the cattle land east of town. We'd like a word about these accusations you're making against Mr. Whitfield. They're not accusations, Amelia said. They're facts. He forged a document to steal my father's records. That's a serious claim to make against a man who's done more for this territory's growth than near anybody else in it, Garrett said, and something in his tone made Amelia's stomach tighten with dread. There's also been some talk, Miss Carter, about the nature of your travels these past days. Riding alone with Mr. Walker, staying at his ranch, unmarried and unchaperoned. Amelia felt heat rush to her face, fury and humiliation tangled together. My reputation is not the matter at hand here, Mr. Garrett. A crime has been committed. Perhaps, Garrett said. Or perhaps a woman traveling the territory unescorted, making wild accusations against respected businessmen, is exactly the kind of behavior that gives this council pause about her fitness to hold property at all. The words landed like a physical blow, and Amelia understood with sudden and sickening clarity exactly what Whitfield had done. He hadn't just stolen her proof. He'd spent days poisoning the well behind her quietly, carefully, so that by the time she returned to fight for what was hers, the fight itself would already be framed as evidence against her. That's enough. Ethan's voice cut across the gathering crowd, low and furious, in a way Amelia hadn't heard from him before. This woman had her father's store broken into, his deed stolen, and a forged document used to rob a bank account, and you're standing here talking about her reputation. Careful, Walker, Garrett said. Your own standing in this territory isn't beyond question either, getting this tangled up in a Carter family dispute. That's none of your concern. Made it my concern the moment I watched three of Whitfield's men grab her by the wrist on an open road, Ethan shot back. And I'll keep making it my concern until this territory remembers that a woman doesn't lose her rights to her own property just because some men in this town find her too inconvenient to defend. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some faces sympathetic, more of them wary, unwilling to plant a flag against a man with Whitfield's money in reach. Garrett's jaw tightened. This isn't finished, Miss Carter. The council will be reviewing the legitimacy of your claim given the circumstances. Review whatever you like, Amelia said, finding her voice again steady despite the tremor still running through her. The land grant exists. I intend to prove it with or without this council's approval. She turned and walked toward the horses without waiting for a response. Spine straight, chin lifted, every ounce of the old armor back in place. Though this time, for the first time, it didn't feel quite so lonely to wear it. Knowing Ethan fell into step right behind her, close enough that she could feel the steady, unshakable presence of him at her back. They're going to try to take it, she said quietly once they were out of earshot of the crowd. Not just through Whitfield's lies, through the town itself, through people who've known my family for years deciding all at once that I'm not worth defending. Not all of them, Ethan said. Cole didn't hesitate. Neither did the men who rode with us. There's more people in your corner than you're counting right now, Amelia. You're just so used to fighting alone you forget to look for 'em. She glanced at him, something in her chest aching in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Is that what you are? Someone in my corner? Ethan stopped walking, and so did she. And for a long moment, the noise of the town seemed to fall away entirely, leaving only the two of them standing in the dust, closer than either of them had quite meant to stand. Amelia, he said, quiet and rough. I rode 3 days out of my way, put my own men between you and armed strangers twice now, and I'm fixin' to ride another week to Helena to help you prove a claim that isn't even mine to fight for. His eyes held hers steady and unflinching. I think we're well past me just being in your corner. Her breath caught. Then what are you? He didn't answer right away. and something in the silence between them felt heavier than any words could have, until Cole's voice broke through from down the street, calling that the horses were ready, and the moment folded itself carefully away, unfinished waiting. "Helena," Ethan said instead, stepping back, though something lingered in his eyes that told her the question hadn't gone anywhere at all. "Let's go prove that land's yours. We'll finish this conversation after." Amelia nodded throat tight and turned toward the horses, and didn't see the rider watching from the mouth of the alley across the street, didn't see him wheel his horse and disappear at a hard gallop toward the road that led eventually to Whitfield's office. By the time Amelia and Ethan's small party cleared the edge of Blackwater Creek, Whitfield already knew exactly where they were headed, and exactly how much time he had left to make sure they never arrived. He folded the fresh telegram slowly, expression unreadable, and reached for his hat. "Helena," he murmured. "Then I suppose it's time I paid the territorial office a visit myself." The telegram found them 2 days into the ride toward Helena, delivered by a rider Cole had posted at the last relay station, specifically to watch for word from the ranch. And the moment Ethan read it, Amelia watched every ounce of color drain out of his face. "What is it?" she asked. "Barn's on fire," he said, voice tight and controlled in the particular way she'd already learned meant he was holding something back by pure force of will. "Cole's message says it started 2 nights ago. They got it out before it spread to the house, but—" He stopped, jaw working. "But what?" "But it didn't start on its own," he said. "Barn fires don't start on their own in the middle of a wet spring, Amelia. Not without help." The words landed heavy between them, and Amelia felt the guilt she'd been holding at bay since Blackwater Creek finally break loose and flood through her chest. "This is because of me," she said. "Because you stood beside me on that road. Because you rode with me to my store, to the bank, to the council meeting where half the town decided I wasn't worth defending." Her voice cracked. "Whitfield can't touch me directly without making himself look guilty, so he's going after everyone standing near me instead." "Amelia, you should go back," she said, the words tumbling out fast now, urgent before she lost the nerve to say them. "Your ranch needs you. Your men need you. I can finish this myself. I can ride to Helena alone. I can—" "Stop." Ethan's voice cut through hers, not sharp, but absolutely immovable. "Just stop for a second." She stopped, breath ragged, and looked at him. "You think I don't know what I signed up for when I stepped off my horse on that canyon road?" he said. "I knew exactly what kind of man Whitfield was before you ever showed up in my life. Knew it, and stayed clear of his business for 2 years, because it wasn't mine to get tangled in." His eyes held hers steady, despite the fear she could see flickering underneath. "I chose to make it mine. Nobody forced my hand. Not you. Not anybody." "But your barn—" "Cole put the fire out. Nobody was hurt. My men are watching the property close now, armed and ready for whatever comes next." He reached out, took her hand, careful, like he was giving her every chance to pull away if she wanted to. She didn't. "A barn can be rebuilt, Amelia. What Whitfield's trying to steal from you can't be unstolen if we don't get to Helena before that hearing date." "What hearing date?" Ethan hesitated, and something in his hesitation told her there was more bad news coming. "Message says a lawyer filed papers in Helena 3 days ago, disputing your claim to the land based on the bank document Whitfield forged. There's a hearing scheduled. Territorial judge is set to rule on temporary control of the property while the matter's investigated." He met her eyes. 6 days from now." Amelia's stomach dropped. 6 days? We're still 4 days out from Helena. "Then we ride harder," Ethan said. "And we pray the land grant's still sitting in that archive where it's supposed to be, because if it's not—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They pushed the horses harder over the next 2 days, stopping only when the animals themselves demanded it, sleeping in short, broken stretches beside the trail. Amelia felt the exhaustion settle into her bones, but underneath it, something else was growing too. A strange, fierce determination that hadn't been there when she'd first set out from Blackwater Creek, believing she could handle everything alone. It was on the 3rd night, huddled close to a small fire with Cole and the other men keeping watch a short distance off, that Ethan finally told her the rest of what Cole's message had said. "There's more," he said quietly, staring into the flames rather than at her. Cole talked to one of the hands who quit working for Whitfield last month. Man drinks too much, but he's honest when he's had enough whiskey to loosen his tongue. He glanced at her. Says Whitfield's been after this specific stretch of land for near 3 years now, long before your daddy ever built the trading post on it. 3 years. That's before I even knew Whitfield's name existed. Man says it's got nothing to do with the store, Ethan said. Says there's a survey crew come through the territory 2 summers back, scouting a route for a rail spur lining up freight from the mountains down to the main line. And the only clean crossing point for that spur runs directly through your father's land. Amelia felt something click into place, cold and clear. A railroad. If that spur gets built, whoever controls that crossing point controls freight prices for half this territory for the next 50 years. Ethan's expression was grim. Whitfield's not after a trading post, Amelia. He's after a fortune. Your daddy's little store just happens to be sitting square in the middle of it. Why didn't he just offer to buy it outright before my father died? Why all this? She gestured vaguely at everything: the forged documents, the wrecked store, the burned barn, instead of a fair price. Because your daddy already turned him down, Ethan said quietly. Same hired hand told Cole that Whitfield made an offer 2 years back. Your father refused. Said something about not selling out the town's future freight rates to line one man's pockets. He paused. Whitfield doesn't forget being told no, Amelia. Not from Hargrove. Not from your father. Not from me. Amelia sat with that for a long moment, staring into the fire, feeling the shape of the whole conspiracy settle into focus for the first time. Not petty cruelty, not simple greed, but a calculated, patient plan that had been unfolding for years, waiting for exactly the moment of weakness her father's death had created. He waited for my father to die, she said slowly. Waited until the land passed to a woman traveling alone with no husband, no brothers, nobody the town would automatically stand behind. Her hands curled into fists in her lap. He thought I'd be the easy version of this fight. Are you? Ethan asked, and something in his voice told her it wasn't really a question. No, Amelia said, and for the first time in days, the old steel came back into her voice, sharp and certain. He picked wrong. They rode into Helena on the morning of the 5th day, exhausted, road-worn, but moving with a fierce sense of purpose that hadn't been there when they'd left Blackwater Creek. The Territorial Land Office sat at the edge of the growing city, a squat brick building with clerks moving in and out, with the particular harried energy of men who spent their days buried in paperwork nobody outside their walls ever cared to understand. The clerk who greeted them, an older man named Whitmore, spectacles perched low on his nose, went very still when Amelia gave him her name. Carter, he repeated slowly. As in the Willow Ridge land grant. That's right, Amelia said, heart-hammering. I need to see the original filing. There's a dispute pending, and I need to confirm the record still exists. Whitmore's expression shifted, careful and guarded. Miss Carter, I'm afraid there's already been considerable interest in that particular file this week. Amelia's stomach dropped straight through the floor. What kind of interest? A lawyer came through 3 days ago representing a Mr. Whitfield. Requested to review the same filing you're asking about. Whitmore lowered his voice. Filed a formal challenge to its validity, matter of fact. Claimed there were irregularities in the original survey markers. That's impossible, Amelia said. That land grant was filed 20 years ago. It's been standing without challenge for 2 decades. I'm only telling you what was filed, ma'am. Whitmore glanced nervously toward the back office, then leaned in slightly, voice dropping further still. Between us, and I'd deny saying this if asked, that lawyer seemed awful eager to see the file get lost in processing. Kept asking where the physical copy was kept, whether there were duplicates, whether the survey map still existed, separate from the deed record. Amelia felt cold dread pool low in her stomach. You're saying he was trying to figure out how to destroy it? I'm saying I've worked this office 11 years, and I know eagerness when I see it, and that man's eagerness didn't sit right with me. Whitmore straightened, some quiet resolve settling into his weathered face. which is why I made a personal copy of the full file myself the day after he left and had it notarized separate from the archive. Relief crashed through Amelia so hard her knees nearly buckled. You did what? Man's request made me suspicious enough to protect myself in this office from whatever mess was coming, Whitmore said. I've seen land disputes turn ugly before, Miss Carter. Wasn't about to let this territory's records get compromised on my watch. He disappeared into the back office and returned a few minutes later with a thick folder, setting it carefully on the counter between them. Original survey, original filing date, your father's signature witnessed by 2 territorial officials. Notarized copy, dated this week, matching the archive exactly. Amelia's hands shook as she opened the folder, scanning the familiar careful script of her father's signature, the official seals, the survey markers laid out in precise, undeniable detail. This is it, she breathed. This is everything I need. There's a hearing set for the day after tomorrow, Whitmore said. Judge Harmon presiding. I'd suggest you and your lawyer be there early with this in hand. I don't have a lawyer, Amelia admitted. Ethan stepped forward. I do. Man named Cross does work for me out of Helena Regular. I sent word ahead 3 days back, asking him to meet us here. Amelia turned to him, something warm and startled moving through her chest. You arranged a lawyer before we even arrived. Figured we might need one, Ethan said simply. Better to have him and not need him than need him and not have him. She didn't have words for the feeling that rose up in her at that, the strange, unfamiliar sensation of someone thinking 3 steps ahead on her behalf, not to control her, not to take the fight out of her hands, but simply to make sure she had every possible advantage when the moment came to fight it herself. Thank you, she said quietly, and it came out rougher than she intended. Don't thank me yet, Ethan said. We've still got a hearing to win. The lawyer Cross turned out to be a sharp, no-nonsense man in his 40s who read through the notarized folder twice before looking up with something like grim satisfaction. This is solid, he said. Whitfield's lawyer is going to argue the survey markers were improperly recorded, try to create enough doubt that the judge grants a delay, maybe even temporary control of the property pending further review, but with a properly witnessed notarized original filing. He tapped the folder. I don't see how they win this outright. Delay maybe. Outright victory, no. A delay's still dangerous, Ethan said. Whitfield doesn't need to win the hearing. He just needs enough time to keep pressing from every other angle while the courts drag their feet. Then we make sure there's no room for delay, Cross said. We come in with everything laid out clean, the forged bank document, the notarized land grant. And if you've got anyone willing to testify to Whitfield's history of pressuring landowners, that goes a long way toward showing the judge a pattern instead of an isolated dispute. Amelia thought of Cole's story about Hargrove, the burned barn, the land sold cheap and fast. There might be someone, she said slowly. A man named Hargrove. Sold his land to Whitfield 2 years ago after his barn burned down, under circumstances nobody ever explained. Where's he now? I don't know, Amelia admitted. He left the territory after the sale. Then we work with what we've got, Cross said. The forged document alone should be enough to raise serious doubt about everything else Whitfield's claiming. They spent the next day preparing, going over every detail of the case again and again, until Amelia could recite the timeline in her sleep, the broken deed box, the forged bank signature, the wrecked trading post, the burned barn, each piece laid out like the columns of a ledger that taken together told an unmistakable story. It was late that evening, the two of them alone on the small porch of the boarding house, where they'd taken rooms, that Amelia finally let herself say the thing she'd been carrying since the telegram about the fire. I keep thinking about what happens after this, she said quietly. Even if we win the hearing, even if the judge rules in my favor, Whitfield's not going to stop, is he? Men like him don't stop just because a court tells them no. No, Ethan admitted. Probably not entirely. But a court ruling in your favor takes away his best weapon, the doubt, the confusion, the idea that maybe you don't really have a legal claim at all. Once that's settled, clean public on record, He's got a lot fewer shadows left to hide his next move in. And if his next move is worse, if he goes after your ranch again, or worse than a barn fire next time. Ethan was quiet for the moment, looking out at the darkening street. Then we deal with that when it comes. Same as we've dealt with everything else. We, Amelia repeated softly. You keep saying we. Because it is we, Ethan said, turning to look at her fully now. Has been since that canyon road, whether either of us said it out loud or not. Amelia's throat tightened. I've spent my whole life being told I take on too much alone, that I don't know how to need anybody. She looked down at her hands. And now here I am, letting you arrange lawyers and ride into danger and lose sleep over telegrams about barn fires, all because of a fight that isn't even yours. I don't know how to hold both of those things at once, being the woman who doesn't need saving, and being the woman who's grateful every single day that you didn't listen when I tried to send you away. Maybe they're not as different as you think, Ethan said quietly. Maybe not needin' savin' and letting somebody stand beside you anyway aren't opposites at all. She looked up at him, and something in his expression made her breath catch the same quiet certainty she'd seen in him on the canyon road. The same steady warmth that had been building between them, mile after mile, decision after decision, since the moment he'd first swung down off his horse and told 3 armed men to let go of her wrist. Amelia, he said low, there's something I've been wanting to say since Blackwater Creek, and I keep finding reasons to put it off because the timing's never right, and I'm starting to think there's never going to be a right time in the middle of all this, so I'm just going to say it now. Her heart hammered. Say it. I didn't stop on that road because it was the decent thing to do, he said. Decent thing would have been riding on minding my own business, not dragging my ranch and my men into a fight against a man like Whitfield. His eyes held hers unwavering. I stopped because something in me knew the second I saw you kneeling in that dirt, refusing to ask for help, that I wasn't going to be able to just ride past you and keep going like nothing had happened. Ethan, I know this isn't the time, he said. I know there's a hearing tomorrow and a man out there trying to ruin us both, and maybe it's foolish to be saying any of this in the middle of all that. But I've spent 8 years building a life I told myself was enough, and 2 days with you undid all of that convincing. His voice roughened. I don't want you to walk out of my life once this fight's over, Amelia. Whatever happens tomorrow. Amelia felt tears rise hot and sudden, and for once she didn't fight them back. I told myself the same thing, she admitted. That I'd finish this fight, settle the land, and go back to being the woman who didn't need anyone. But every single day since that canyon road, that lie's gotten harder and harder to believe. So don't believe it anymore. Ethan said softly. It's not that simple. You know what people say about me? What they said in that council meeting? A woman who doesn't behave, who doesn't fit, who's too much of everything nobody wants a wife to be. The old fear rose up in her, sharp and familiar. I've spent my whole life being told I'm not the kind of woman a man builds a life with. I don't know how to stop hearing that, even when you're standing right here telling me something different. Ethan reached out, took her hand, gentle and certain. Who told you that being different was something to apologize for? Everyone, she whispered. Then everyone was wrong, he said, echoing something he'd said before on the ranch, that first storm-drenched night, and it landed even harder now, weighted with everything they'd survived together since. You said it yourself first day we met. I'm not like other women. His thumb brushed gently over her knuckles. That's exactly why I need you, Amelia. Not despite it, because of it. The words broke something loose in her chest. Some old tight knot of loneliness she'd carried so long, she'd forgotten it was possible to set it down. She didn't trust herself to speak, so she simply stepped closer, and Ethan's arms came around her steady and sure. And for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. Standing together in the quiet dark, with a hearing looming, and a war far from over. And somehow, none of it feeling quite as frightening as it had an hour before. Whatever happens tomorrow, Ethan murmured against her hair. You're not facing any of it alone. Not the hearing, not Whitfield, not any of it. I know, Amelia said, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she actually believed it. The hearing began at 9 o'clock the next morning, in a courtroom crowded tighter than Amelia had expected, word of the dispute having clearly traveled fast through Helena's small legal community. Judge Harmon presided from behind a heavy oak bench, a stern-faced man in his 60s, who looked, Amelia thought, like someone who had heard every manner of lie a courtroom could produce, and had grown considerably tired of most of them. Whitfield sat at the opposing table beside his lawyer, composed and unbothered, offering Amelia a small courteous nod when their eyes met that made her stomach turn with quiet fury. Cross rose first, laying out the timeline with methodical precision, the deed stolen from the trading post, the forged bank signature, Pruitt's reluctant but confirmed testimony about the falsified transfer document, and finally the notarized copy of the original land grant, filed and witnessed 20 years prior, long before Whitfield had ever set foot in the territory. Whitfield's lawyer countered as expected, questioning the survey markers, suggesting irregularities in the original filing, painting a picture of confusion and ambiguity where Cross had laid out clarity. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, "given the clear disputes surrounding this claim, given the questionable circumstances of Miss Carter's unescorted travel, and the, shall we say, unconventional nature of her current arrangements." His eyes flicked meaningfully toward Ethan, and Amelia felt her face heat with fury. "We respectfully request the court grant temporary control of the property to Mr. Whitfield pending full investigation." "Objection," Cross said sharply. "Miss Carter's traveling arrangements have no bearing whatsoever on the legal validity of a land grant filed 2 decades ago. They speak to character, Your Honor, and character speaks to credibility." Judge Harmon's expression didn't shift, but something in his eyes sharpened, and Amelia felt a flicker of hope that he saw exactly what game was being played. "Mr. Cross is correct," the judge said flatly. "This court has no interest in Miss Carter's personal arrangements. We are here to determine the legal ownership of a piece of property, nothing more. Continue." Cross laid out the rest of the evidence, methodical and unshakable, and Amelia watched Whitfield's composed expression begin for the first time since she'd met him to show the faintest crack of strain. Then Cross called his final witness, and the courtroom door opened, and a man Amelia had never seen before walked in, weathered, nervous, clearly uncomfortable in the crowded room, but present. "Your Honor," Cross said, "I call Mr. Aaron Hargrove to the stand." Amelia's breath caught. Whitfield's composed mask finally completely shattered. "Objection," his lawyer said quickly. "This witness was not previously disclosed. He came forward voluntarily this morning, Your Honor, after hearing of these proceedings," Cross said. "Given the relevance of his testimony to establishing a pattern of conduct, I request the court allow it." Judge Harmon studied Hargrove for a long moment. "I'll allow it. Briefly." Hargrove took the stand, hands twisting nervously in his lap, and told the court haltingly at first, and then with growing conviction, about the barn fire 2 years prior, about the sudden unexplained pressure to sell his land at a fraction of its worth, about leaving the territory out of fear rather than choice. "Why come forward now?" Cross asked. "Heard talk in town about what happened to Miss Carter," Hargrove said. "Store broken into, deed stolen, barn burned at the Walker Ranch." He glanced briefly toward Whitfield, something like old fear and new resolve warring in his face. "Sounded exactly like what happened to me. Figured somebody ought to say something before it happens to somebody else too." The courtroom had gone utterly silent. Whitfield sat rigid at his table, jaw clenched, and Amelia watched 20 years of careful, patient scheming begin to unravel in real time before a room full of witnesses. Judge Harmon removed his spectacles slowly, setting them down on the bench with a small, deliberate click that seemed to echo through the silent room. "I've heard enough," he said. "This court finds the original land grant filed and properly witnessed 20 years past to be the sole valid claim to the property in question. Any documents suggesting otherwise, including the bank transfer at the center of this dispute, are hereby declared fraudulent, and I am referring this matter to the Territorial Prosecutor's Office for criminal investigation." His eyes moved to Whitfield, cold and unflinching. "Given the pattern of conduct described in this courtroom today, I would strongly advise Mr. Whitfield to secure legal counsel of his own, separate from this civil matter, in the very near future." The gavel came down with a crack that felt to Amelia like the sound of an entire weight lifting off her chest all at once. She turned to find Ethan already looking at her, something fierce and proud shining in his eyes, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all, the victory too large, too hard won to fit into words just yet. Whitfield rose from his table face tight with barely contained fury, and for one brief moment his eyes locked with Amelia's across the courtroom. "This isn't finished," he said, low meant only for her. "It is for the land," Amelia said, steady despite the tremor still running beneath her calm. "Whatever else you've got planned, Mr. Whitfield, you've already lost the only thing that ever really mattered to you." He said nothing more, turning and striding out of the courtroom with his lawyer trailing behind, and Amelia felt Ethan's hand find hers warm and solid and real. "We won," she said, like she still couldn't quite believe it. "We did," Ethan said. "But Amelia—" His expression sobered slightly. "Whitfield didn't get where he is by losing gracefully. Criminal investigation or not, a man like that doesn't just walk away." "I know," Amelia said. "But for the first time since my father died, I'm not facing whatever comes next alone." Ethan's hand tightened around hers, and outside the courthouse, the Helena afternoon stretched bright and wide before them, a victory hard won, a threat not yet fully extinguished. And between the two of them, something new and unshakable finally fully claimed. The ride back from Helena should have felt like victory. It didn't, not fully. Amelia caught herself watching the tree line more than the road, catching Ethan doing the same, both of them carrying Whitfield's parting words like a stone lodged somewhere behind the ribs. "This isn't finished. You keep looking over your shoulder," Ethan said on the second day out, "like you're expecting him to come around the bend himself." "Aren't you?" He didn't answer right away, which was answer enough. "Cross said the prosecutor's office would move fast once the judge referred the case," Amelia said. "That kind of thing doesn't leave a man much room to maneuver. Man like Whitfield's had 2 years to plan for exactly this kind of trouble," Ethan said. "I'd be a fool to think losing one hearing means he's out of moves." They reached Blackwater Creek on the 4th day, and the barn, scorched black along one whole wall roof, still holding but blistered raw, stood as a plain ugly reminder that Ethan hadn't been exaggerating. Cole met them in the yard rifle still slung across his back out of habit, now rather than immediate need, and the look on his face told Amelia there was more news waiting, none of it good. "Sheriff rode out from Willow Ridge 2 days back," Cole said. "Asking after you both." "About the case?" Amelia asked. "About a robbery," Cole said. "Prosecutor's office in Helena. Somebody broke in the night after your hearing, went straight for the evidence room." Amelia's stomach dropped straight through the ground. "The forged bank document. The land grant copy." "Land grant's fine," Cole said quickly. Whitmore kept a third copy at the land office itself, separate from what went to the prosecutor. But the forged transfer paper, the one Pruitt handed over as evidence— He shook his head. "Gone. Clean gone. No sign of forced entry on half the doors, like whoever did it had a key." "He's got someone inside," Ethan said grimly. "Paid off or scared into it. Either way, he's still got reach even sittin' under investigation." "There's more," Cole said, and something in his voice made Amelia brace herself before he even said it. "Sheriff wants to talk to you personal, Miss Carter. Says there's a witness claims he saw you near the prosecutor's office the night of the break-in." The words landed like a slap. "That's impossible. I was in Blackwater Creek riding home with Ethan and half a dozen witnesses who'll say the same." "I know that. You know that." Cole's jaw was tight. "But it's your word, and half a dozen ranch hands against whatever this so-called witness is claiming. And I'd bet good money that witness works for Whitfield, same as the men who grabbed your wrist on that canyon road." Amelia felt the fury rise up, hot and immediate. The particular fury of watching a lie constructed in real time, brick by careful brick, aimed straight at the one thing she had left after everything else had been stolen, her own credibility. "He's not attacking the land claim anymore," she said slowly, understanding dawning cold and sharp. "He can't. The judge already ruled. So now he's attacking me. If he can get me arrested, discredited, painted as a thief who tampered with evidence, then the whole case looks compromised," Ethan finished. Might even be enough to get the ruling reconsidered. That's not justice, Amelia said. That's just cruelty wearing a badge. Welcome to how men like Whitfield operate, Cole said grimly. They don't stop when they lose. They just change which weapon they're swinging. The sheriff arrived the following morning, a broad, tired-looking man named Dobbs, who had the particular weariness of someone who'd spent 30 years watching the law get twisted by men with enough money to afford the twisting. Miss Carter, he said, tipping his hat with more courtesy than she'd expected given the circumstances. I've got a statement here claims you were seen near the Helena prosecutor's office the night of the break-in. Says you were carrying a bag moving quick, acting suspicious. I was here, Amelia said, at the Walker Ranch. I never left Blackwater Creek that night. I believe you, Dobbs said, surprising her. Got 6 witnesses putting you here, including Mr. Walker's foreman, and only 1 witness putting you in Helena, a man who, when I asked around, turns out has done paid work for Jonas Whitfield on 3 separate occasions this past year. He tucked the statement back into his coat. I'm not in the business of arresting a woman on the word of a man with that kind of connection, Miss Carter, but I need you to understand something. What's that? Whitfield's scared, Dobbs said. Man like that don't manufacture a false witness unless he's running out of real options, which means he's getting desperate, and desperate men do reckless things. His eyes moved to Ethan. You two should watch yourselves close, both of you. We intend to, Ethan said. Dobbs nodded, tipped his hat again, and rode off, and Amelia let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding since Cole first mentioned the sheriff's visit. He believed me. She said something like disbelief in her voice. A lawman actually believed me over Whitfield's money. Not every man in this territory's for sale, Ethan said. Just the loud ones. She almost laughed, the tension in her chest cracking just slightly, and for a moment, standing in the ranch yard with the scorched barn behind them and the morning sun warm overhead, it almost felt like they might actually be winning. That feeling lasted exactly 4 days. While it was Mrs. Dawes who brought the news riding out from Willow Ridge herself, rather than trusting it to a letter, her face pale, and her hands still shaking as she climbed down from her borrowed horse. Miss Carter, she said, breathless, you need to hear this from someone who cares about you before you hear it from someone who doesn't. Mrs. Dawes, what's happened? Whitfield's gone, the older woman said. Left the territory 2 nights back. Cleared out his accounts, sold what property he could sell fast, and vanished before the prosecutor could even file charges. Amelia felt something complicated rise in her chest. Relief tangled tight with a fury that had nowhere left to land. He's just gone. After everything he did. That's not all, Mrs. Dawes said, glancing nervously at Ethan. Before he left, he went to the town council, filed a formal complaint against the land grant ruling, claiming the whole hearing was rigged on account of your personal relationship with Mr. Walker influencing the judge's sympathies. Her face reddened with second-hand embarrassment. Said the 2 of you conspired together to forge evidence against him, matter of fact. Council's calling a public meeting to discuss it, day after tomorrow. Amelia stood very still, feeling the ground she'd only just started to trust beneath her feet begin to shift again. He's running, Ethan said slowly, working through it. But he's making sure he leaves a mess behind him big enough that we're too busy cleaning it up to chase him. Can he even do that? Amelia asked. File a complaint and then just disappear. Doesn't matter if he can make it stick, Ethan said grimly. Matters if he can make people believe it long enough to do damage. Man spent his whole life understanding that truth moves slow and rumor moves fast. He's betting the rumor gets to town before the truth does. Then we get there first, Amelia said, old steel snapping back into her spine. We go to that meeting, and we tell the truth before anyone else gets a chance to twist it. The council chamber was packed tighter than Amelia had ever seen it word of Whitfield's flight, and his parting accusation having torn through Willow Ridge and Blackwater Creek, both like wildfire in dry grass. Garrett sat at the head of the council table, flanked by the same men who'd questioned Amelia's fitness weeks before, and the room's mood felt thick with the particular hunger crowds got when they smelled scandal rather than justice. "Miss Carter," Garrett began without much preamble, "serious allegations have been made regarding the conduct of your land dispute hearing. Given Mr. Whitfield's sudden departure from the territory, some might say these allegations now carry considerably more weight." "Some might say," Amelia replied, standing tall, despite every eye in the room fixed on her, "that a man fleeing in the night ahead of criminal charges is not exactly a reliable source for anything except his own guilt." A murmur rippled through the crowd, some agreement, more uncertainty. "He claims," Garrett pressed, "that your relationship with Mr. Walker compromised the objectivity of the proceedings, that the judge was swayed by sympathy rather than fact." "The judge was swayed," Amelia said, voice ringing clear across the chamber, "by a notarized land grant filed 20 years ago by a bank manager who confessed under oath that a forged signature was used to steal my father's property, and by a man named Hargrove, who traveled here of his own free will to testify that Whitfield burned his barn and stole his land 2 years before I ever met Ethan Walker." She let that settle. "Mr. Whitfield isn't accusing me of corrupting justice. He's accusing me of surviving him." The murmur grew louder, shifting now, tilting. "And as for my relationship with Mr. Walker," Amelia continued, and felt Ethan's eyes on her from where he stood near the back of the room, steady and unwavering. "I won't apologize for it, and I won't pretend it doesn't exist to make this council more comfortable. He stood beside me when 3 armed men grabbed my wrist on an open road. He stood beside me when my father's store was ransacked and his deed stolen. He rode a week out of his way to help me prove a claim that had nothing to do with him and lost a barn for his trouble." Her voice caught just slightly before steadying. "If this council wants to punish me for finding someone who refused to let me face all of that alone, then I think this council has considerably bigger problems than anything Jonas Whitfield ever accused me of." Silence held the room for a long moment. Then from the back, a voice Amelia hadn't expected spoke up. "She's right." Heads turned. Whitmore, the land office clerk, stood near the door, hat in hand, clearly uncomfortable but resolute. "I notarized that land grant copy myself, gentlemen, on account of my own suspicions about Whitfield's lawyer asking too many questions about how easy that file might be to lose. Wasn't influenced by sympathy for anybody. Was influenced by 20 years watching this territory's records and knowing when something smelled wrong." Another voice followed Pruitt, the bank manager standing near the front, wringing his hat in his hands, with the particular misery of a man who'd finally decided honesty was less frightening than continued complicity. "I'll say the same. I accepted that forged document because I was afraid of what Whitfield might do if I didn't. That fear was mine, gentlemen. Wasn't Miss Carter's doing and wasn't the judge's doing either." Garrett's expression had shifted, some of the certainty draining out of it, as the room's mood continued turning slow but unmistakable away from suspicion and towards something closer to shame. "I move," said a woman near the front. Amelia recognized her as one of the school teachers from Willow Ridge, someone she'd never spoken more than a few words to. "That this council formally close this matter and perhaps consider whether a man who forges documents, steals deeds, and flees the territory ahead of criminal charges deserves this much of our attention at all when there's a woman standing right here who's done nothing but survive him." A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd, growing, and Garrett, outnumbered by the room's shifting temperature, cleared his throat. "The council will take the matter under advisement," he said, which was, Amelia understood, as close to defeat as a man like Garrett was ever likely to admit publicly. "This meeting is adjourned." The room broke into noise and motion, and Amelia stood at the center of it, shaking slightly with the release of tension she'd been carrying since Mrs. Dawes first rode into the ranch yard with the news of Whitfield's flight. Ethan crossed to her through the dispersing crowd, something fierce and proud in his face. "You didn't need me for that," he said quietly. "You did that yourself." "I didn't do it alone," Amelia said. "I don't think I could have even a month ago. Standing up in front of that whole room, saying out loud what you meant to me, I wouldn't have had the courage for that before you." "Reckon that's the difference between not needing anybody," Ethan said. and choosing somebody anyway. Whitfield's absence, it turned out, didn't mean the danger had fully passed. It simply changed shape. Word came through the following week that a warrant had been issued for his arrest, but that he'd crossed the territorial line before it could be served, and that tracking him further would fall to federal marshals rather than local law, a process that could take months, possibly longer. "He's out there somewhere," Amelia said one evening, sitting on the ranch house porch with Ethan the scorched barn, a dark shape against the darker hills beyond. "Free, with whatever money he managed to take with him. Marshalls'll find him eventually," Ethan said. "Men like that always slip up somewhere sooner or later. Greed doesn't let 'em disappear clean." "And until then," Ethan said, "we live, we rebuild. We don't hand him one more day of our lives than he's already stolen." Amelia looked at him in the fading light at the barn he'd lost, partly because of her, at the man who'd never once made her feel like a burden for any of it, and felt something settle in her chest that she'd never quite let herself feel before. Not just gratitude, not just affection, but something steadier, something that felt like the beginning of a life rather than the aftermath of a crisis. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, "about the trading post." "What about it?" "Willow Ridge needs it rebuilt. Not just for me, for the whole town. My father spent 20 years making that store into something the community relied on, and I don't want Whitfield's cruelty to be the last chapter of what that place stood for." She hesitated. "But I keep thinking about what it would mean to run it from here, from Blackwater Creek, riding back and forth, splitting myself between two places." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, careful, hopeful. "You thinking about staying here at the ranch?" "I'm thinking," Amelia said, "that I don't want to imagine a version of my life anymore that doesn't have you in the middle of it. And I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, the store, the ranch, all of it. But I know I don't want to figure it out alone." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, and when he reached for her hand, his own was less than steady, which surprised her more than almost anything else he'd done since that first afternoon on the canyon road. "Amelia," he said, "I've been carrying something around in my coat pocket for the better part of a week now, waiting for a moment that felt right, and I'm starting to understand there's never going to be a moment that isn't complicated given everything we've been through together. So I reckon this one's as good as any." Her breath caught as he shifted, reaching into his coat, and produced a small ring. Simple, unadorned, clearly not new. Clearly carrying some weight of history she didn't yet understand. "This was my mother's," he said quietly. "Kept it packed away since she passed. Never figured I'd have reason to take it back out." He held it carefully, like it might break, though Amelia suspected the fragility he was handling had less to do with the ring itself and more to do with the moment surrounding it. "I know we've known each other a matter of weeks, not years. I know most folks would say that's too fast, too sudden, too much to trust after everything we've survived together in such a short stretch of time." "Ethan, let me finish," he said, gentle but urgent, "before I lose my nerve." He met her eyes steady, despite the tremor in his hands. "I spent 8 years after Sarah died, convincing myself that a quiet life, a life with no risk of that kind of loss again, was enough. And then you showed up on that canyon road refusing to be saved, and every single thing I'd convinced myself of came apart in about the time it took you to tell me you weren't like other women." His thumb brushed over the ring once, like a small prayer. "I don't want a quiet life anymore, Amelia. I want the life where you're in it, loud, stubborn, brilliant, impossible to have talked out of anything you've set your mind to. I want to build something with you, not survive something beside you. Will you marry me?" Amelia felt tears rise before she could stop them, and for once she didn't try. "Yes," she said, the word coming out on a broken, joyful breath. "Yes, Ethan, of course, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger with hands that weren't quite steady, and Amelia laughed through her tears, disbelieving, overwhelmed, more purely happy than she could remember being in longer than she wanted to admit. "I'm not like other women," she said, half laughing, echoing the words that had started everything. "No." Ethan agreed, pulling her close, his forehead resting against hers. You're not. And that's exactly why you need me, she finished for him, smiling against his mouth just before he kissed her. I know. You've told me before. Gonna keep telling you, he murmured. For the rest of my life, if you'll let me. News of the engagement moved through Blackwater Creek and Willow Ridge with considerably more warmth than the rumors Whitfield had left behind. And Amelia found herself in the weeks that followed discovering something she'd never quite expected. That being different, being outspoken, being exactly herself, without apology, hadn't cost her the community's respect after everything. If anything, it had earned something deeper than respect. It had earned belonging. Mrs. Dawes helped organize a small gathering to celebrate the news, and half the town showed up, including several of the very people who'd once whispered about her behind careful hands. Even Garrett, stiff and awkward, offered his congratulations, along with something that might have been the beginning of an apology, though he never quite managed to say the word outright. Never thought I'd see this town rally around anybody the way they've rallied around you, Cole said to her, at the gathering uncharacteristically warm. Reckon you earned it the hard way. Reckon I did, Amelia agreed. Though I couldn't have earned it alone. Nobody earns anything worth having alone, Cole said. Man just took him longer than most to remember that. She found Ethan across the yard laughing at something one of the ranch hands had said, and felt watching him a wave of gratitude so complete it nearly stole her breath, not just for him, but for the whole unlikely hard-won shape her life had taken since a wagon wheel cracked on a canyon road and changed absolutely everything. The rebuilding of the trading post began that same month, funded partly by Amelia's own savings, and partly to her surprise, by a collection quietly organized by townspeople who decided in the aftermath of everything that Carter's trading post belonged to Willow Ridge as much as it belonged to her. She rebuilt it not as it had been, but better. Wider shelves, better organized accounts. A small back room where she began almost accidentally at first, teaching reading and arithmetic to children from outlying farms who had no schoolhouse close enough to attend regularly. You're turning into quite the institution around here, Ethan told her one evening, watching her close up the store after a day spent half on inventory and half on multiplication tables with a cluster of farm children who'd refused to leave until she'd finished the lesson. I'm turning into my father, Amelia said. He always said a trading post worth its name gives the town more than it takes. He'd be proud of you, Ethan said, for what it's worth. It's worth everything, Amelia said quietly. They married in the spring beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the Walker Ranch. Soon, Amelia understood to become simply the ranch, the place she now called home, without hesitation. It was a small ceremony, unpretentious, exactly the way both of them wanted it, though half the town showed up anyway, drawn by an affection for the story itself, as much as for the two people at the center of it. Word arrived months later that Whitfield had finally been apprehended in a territory 2 states over, attempting to run the same fraud against a different landowner using a different name, and that this time there would be no fleeing ahead of the charges. Amelia read the letter from the marshal's office with a strange, quiet sense of closure rather than triumph. The fight was truly over now, not just paused, and she found she could set it down entirely, without the old vigilance that had shadowed even her happiest weeks since the engagement. It's finished, she said to Ethan, setting the letter down on the kitchen table. It's finished, he agreed, coming to stand behind her, arms wrapping around her shoulders, chin resting against the top of her head. Everything he tried to take from you, and he still lost it all in the end. Everything he tried to take, Amelia repeated softly. And I still ended up with more than I ever imagined having. She turned in his arms to face him. A husband, a home, a store that means something to this whole town, not just to me. Children who show up wanting to learn, even when I haven't asked them to. She smiled, a little disbelieving, still even now. I spent so many years believing that being different meant being alone. That the two things came as a set, and there wasn't any way to have one without the other. And now I think, Amelia said, that being different was never the problem. I just hadn't found the person yet who understood that it was never something that needed fixing. Ethan's mouth curved warm and certain. Found him now, though. Found him now. Amelia agreed, and let him kiss her standing in the kitchen of the home they'd built together out of wreckage and stubbornness, and a love neither of them had gone looking for, but both had needed more than they'd ever admitted even to themselves. The letter came on a morning otherwise unremarkable, tucked between an order form for seed grain and a note from Mrs. Dawes about the schoolhouse fund, and if the return address hadn't caught Amelia's eye, Territorial Marshal's Office black official seal, she might have set it aside for later and never known how quickly the ground was about to shift beneath her again. She read it standing at the kitchen table, and Ethan watched her face change from curiosity to something colder before she'd finished the first paragraph. "What is it?" "Whitfield's trial," Amelia said slowly. "It's been moved up. 2 weeks from now in the Territorial Court at Helena." She looked up at him. "And they need witnesses. All of us. Whitmore, Pruitt, Hargrove, and me." "That's good, isn't it? Means the case is finally moving. There's more." Amelia's hand tightened on the paper. His lawyers arguing the original hearing was compromised. Same claim he made to the council, but now he's making it formally in front of a judge who could actually undo everything we won. She set the letter down like it had grown suddenly heavy. "If they succeed, the land ruling gets reopened. Everything we fought for could be back on the table." Ethan's jaw tightened, the old wariness she'd hoped was behind them creeping back into his eyes. 2 years and he still hasn't run out of ways to come after what he thinks belongs to him. "There's one more thing," Amelia said, and something in her voice made him go very still. "Marshall's note says there've been threats made against 2 of the witnesses already. Somebody broke into Whitmore's office in Helena last week. Nothing taken. Just a warning left plain enough that nobody could mistake it for accident." "He's still got people," Ethan said grimly. "Even locked up waiting on trial, man's still got people willing to do his dirty work." Amelia pressed a hand flat against her stomach without quite realizing she'd done it, and Ethan's eyes caught the motion softened, despite the tension still written across his face. "You're thinking about the baby," he said quietly. "I'm thinking." Amelia admitted that 4 months ago I would have ridden to Helena myself without a second thought, and now I'm standing here doing arithmetic about how many weeks I have left before travel gets dangerous for reasons that have nothing to do with Whitfield. She met his eyes, some old stubbornness flaring even now. "But I'm still going. I'm the one he tried to destroy first. If anybody testifies to what that man did, it needs to be me." "Amelia, don't," she said, gentle but immovable. "Don't tell me to stay home and let you handle it. We've been past that particular fight since a canyon road 2 years ago, and I'm not interested in relitigating it now." Ethan studied her for a long moment, and something in his face softened into the particular exasperated affection she'd come to know so well. "Wasn't going to tell you to stay home," he said. "Was going to tell you we ride slower this time, and that Cole rides with us the whole way armed whether you think you need the escort or not." Amelia's mouth curved despite the tension still coiled tight in her chest. "That I can agree to." "Ma'am." They left within the week, a slower pace than either of them would have preferred, but a necessary one. Cole and 2 ranch hands riding close escort the entire distance. Amelia felt every mile of the journey differently than she had 2 years before. More careful, more aware of her own body, but no less determined, the old fire banked but never extinguished. It was on the 3rd night, camped along the familiar stretch of road that had once seen Whitfield's men grab her by the wrist, that trouble found them again. Amelia woke to Cole's low, urgent whisper cutting through the dark. "Riders, coming in slow, trying not to be heard." Ethan was already moving rifle in hand, positioning himself between Amelia and the tree line before she'd fully processed the words. "How many?" "Countin' at least 4, Cole murmured. "Could be more in the dark." Amelia's heart hammered, old fear rising fast and familiar, but underneath it now sat something steadier, 2 years of surviving. Worse, of learning that fear didn't have to mean helplessness. Get down, Ethan said quietly, and Amelia obeyed without argument, this time pressing low behind a fallen log hand, instinctively going to the small pistol Ethan had insisted she carry since the engagement, the one she'd once considered unnecessary, and now understood fully why he'd never stopped urging her to keep close. The riders came into the firelight a moment later, and Amelia recognized the lead man instantly, the same cold smile, the same voice from the canyon road 2 years before, though time and evidently continued employment in Whitfield's shrinking circle had worn him harder around the eyes. Didn't figure you'd still be riding together after all this time, the man said, dismounting slow, 3 others fanning out behind him. Didn't figure you'd still be working for a man sitting in a jail cell awaiting trial. Ethan replied, rifle steady, unbothered by the numbers arrayed against him. Man's not paying you near enough for this kind of risk. He's paying plenty, long as the witnesses against him don't make it to Helena to testify. The lead rider's eyes moved past Ethan to Amelia crouched behind the log, and something ugly flickered across his face. Should have stayed home, Mrs. Walker. Condition you're in. Amelia's blood went cold with fury rather than fear. How do you know? Boss keeps good ears in every town you've passed through, the man said. Even locked up, he's got eyes on you both, always has. Then he already knows this is the second time you've tried this exact same trick on this exact same road, Ethan said, and both times it's ended the same way. He raised his voice slightly. Cole. The tree line erupted with movement. Cole and the 2 ranch hands positioned exactly as they had been 2 years before, weapons already trained, and the lead rider's face twisted with the particular fury of a man realizing he'd walked into a trap of his own making. You didn't learn a thing, Ethan said, did you? This isn't finished. The man snarled the same tired threat Whitfield himself had made in a Helena courtroom 2 years prior, and Amelia found herself almost laughing at the predictability of it, fear giving way finally to something closer to contempt. It actually is, Amelia said, standing now steady, despite everything hand still resting protective over her stomach. You can ride back and tell Whitfield that threatening a pregnant woman from behind bars is about the most pathetic thing I've heard yet, and I've heard quite a lot from that man. The riders retreated under the weight of Cole's rifle and the 2 ranch hands flanking them, and once the sound of hooves had faded into the dark, Amelia let herself sag just slightly against Ethan's side. You did that, Ethan murmured against her hair, beautifully. I learned from the best. Amelia said, breath still unsteady. Man told me once that being different wasn't something to apologize for. Smart man. Insufferable man mostly, but smart occasionally. They arrived in Helena 2 days later than planned, but arrived whole, and Cross met them at the courthouse steps with the particular grim satisfaction of a lawyer who'd been waiting for exactly this kind of ammunition. You were attacked on the road, he asked, disbelieving. By men working for Whitfield while he's sitting in custody awaiting trial. 4 of them, Ethan confirmed. Cole and 2 of my men can testify, so can I. Cross's expression shifted into something almost pleased. That's not just a threat to witnesses, that's evidence of continued criminal conspiracy from behind bars. This could add considerable weight to the charges. He looked at Amelia, something gentler in his face. You're certain you're well enough to testify, given the circumstances? I've never been more certain of anything, Amelia said. The courtroom when they entered it 2 days later felt smaller than Amelia remembered, or perhaps she simply felt larger within it, steadier, less like a woman fighting to be believed, and more like a woman who had already survived the worst of what Whitfield could throw at her, and had come out the other side, changed but unbroken. Whitfield sat at the defense table thinner than she remembered, the polish worn considerably off his composure after 2 years of legal battles and evidently dwindling resources. His eyes found hers across the room, and something in them still carried that same cold calculation, though it landed with far less power now than it once had. The trial unfolded over 3 days. Whitmore testified to the notarized land grant and the suspicious eagerness of Whitfield's lawyer to see the original file compromised. Pruitt, considerably more confident now that consequences had already fallen on him once, and he had nothing left to protect, by staying silent, testified in full detail about the forged transfer document. Hargrove returned older and more resolute than he'd seemed at the first hearing, describing the burned barn and the land sold under duress in language that left little room for doubt. And then it was Amelia's turn. She took the stand, steady hand resting lightly against the small swell of her stomach, and told the court everything. The broken wagon wheel, the men on the canyon road, the ransacked trading post, the stolen deed, the forged bank signature, the burned barn, the false witness, placing her falsely in Helena, the attack 2 nights prior on the very road leading to this courthouse, and this most recent attack. The prosecutor asked, "You're certain it was connected to Mr. Whitfield?" "The man leading it told me directly that Whitfield still has eyes on me in every town I pass through," Amelia said, voice ringing clear and unshaken across the courtroom. "He told me I should have stayed home given my condition. That's not coincidence, sir. That's a man behind bars still trying to control what happens outside them." Whitfield's lawyer rose. "Objection. Speculation as to my client's involvement." "Overruled," the judge said flatly, something hard in his expression as he studied Whitfield across the room. "The witness may continue." Amelia continued, methodical and unflinching, laying out 2 years of terror and survival with the same careful precision her father had taught her over a bookkeeping ledger decades before. Every column accounted for every total, adding up to a truth too complete to argue with. When she finished, the courtroom sat in a silence that felt to her like the same silence that had followed Hargrove's testimony 2 years before, the particular quiet of a room finally understanding the full shape of a lie it had once been willing to entertain. "Mrs. Walker?" the defense lawyer said, rising for cross-examination, his voice carrying a thin, desperate edge now. "Isn't it true that your marriage to Mr. Walker and your evident sympathy toward his ranch and his interests might color your recollection of these events?" "My recollection," Amelia said evenly, "is corroborated by a bank manager, a land office clerk, another victim of Mr. Whitfield's scheme, who has no connection to my marriage whatsoever, a territorial sheriff who investigated a false accusation against me, and 4 armed men who attacked our traveling party 2 nights ago on the road to this very courthouse." She held the lawyer's eyes unflinching. "I'd suggest, sir, that the question isn't whether my recollection is colored. The question is, how many more people your client is willing to hurt before this court finally stops him." The lawyer sat down without further questions. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty. On every count: forgery, fraud, conspiracy, and given the fresh testimony about the roadside attack, a new charge of orchestrating criminal threats against witnesses from custody, which the judge noted with particular severity in handing down a sentence considerably longer than the fraud charges alone would have warranted. Whitfield showed no reaction as the verdict was read, no final threats, no parting words. This time, simply a man finally fully out of moves led from the courtroom in shackles, while the gathered crowd watched in a silence that felt to Amelia like the closing of a door she had spent 2 years bracing against. Outside the courthouse, Cross clasped Ethan's hand warmly, something like relief written plain across his face. "That's the end of it," he said. "Truly the end this time. Man's not getting out from under this sentence, and even if he had allies left willing to keep causing trouble, there'll be nothing left for them to gain from it." "Thank you," Amelia said, "for everything, from the very first hearing." "Thank Whitmore and Pruitt and Hargrove," Cross said. "And thank yourself, Mrs. Walker. Most people would have folded a dozen times over facing what you faced. You never once did." Amelia found Ethan's hand and held it tight, feeling something settle in her chest that felt for the first time in 2 years genuinely and completely like peace. "It's over," she said, half disbelieving even now. "Really over. Really over." Ethan confirmed, pulling her close despite the crowd still filtering out of the courthouse around them. "No more looking over our shoulders. No more waiting for the next telegram." He rested a hand gently over the curve of her stomach. "Just us. And whoever this little one turns out to be." "I have a feeling," Amelia said, laughing through sudden tears, "he's going to be as stubborn as both of us combined." "God help us all," Ethan said, and kissed her right there on the courthouse steps. careless of who might be watching, because for the first time since a wagon wheel had cracked on a canyon road, there was nothing left to fear in being seen. They rode home slower than they'd come, no longer needing to watch the tree line, no longer needing Cole's rifle held at the ready, and Amelia found herself somewhere in the third day of easy, unhurried travel, simply looking at the land around her, really looking the way she hadn't allowed herself to, since this whole fight began, and feeling for the first time in longer than she could remember entirely and completely present in her own life. "You're quiet," Ethan observed. "I'm happy," Amelia said, and the word felt strange in her mouth, unfamiliar after 2 years of vigilance, like a language she was only now remembering how to speak. "I don't think I've let myself just be happy without bracing for what comes next since before my father died." "Get used to it," Ethan said. "Planning on a whole lot more of it starting now." The ranch, when they finally reached it, felt different. Somehow, not changed physically, though the barn had long since been rebuilt, stronger and larger than the one Whitfield's men had burned, but different in the way a place feels different once the danger surrounding it has finally truly lifted. Cole met them in the yard with something almost like a smile, rare enough on his weathered face that Amelia nearly laughed at the sight of it. "Heard the verdict already," he said. "Word travels fast when it's good news for once." "Good news travels slower than bad," Amelia said, "but it does travel." The months that followed passed in a rhythm Amelia had never quite believed she'd get to have, ordinary, unremarkable, blessedly free of telegrams and threats and courtroom battles. The trading post thrived under her management, the schoolroom in the back corner growing crowded enough that she eventually convinced the town council, the same council that had once questioned her fitness to hold property at all, to fund a proper schoolhouse. Staffed by a young teacher Amelia herself helped recruit from Helena. She gave birth in the depths of winter, in the same ranch house where she'd first taken shelter from a storm 2 years before, to a daughter with her father's steady dark eyes, and from the very first week a set of lungs that suggested she had inherited her mother's stubbornness in full measure. "She's got your temper already," Ethan said, exhausted and radiant, watching Amelia hold their daughter for the first time. "She's got your patience," Amelia countered. "God knows she'll need both growing up in this family." They named her Sarah Grace, Sarah, for the woman whose memory Ethan had carried quietly for 8 lonely years before Amelia arrived. Grace for the mercy Amelia felt every single day that her own hardest years had ended somewhere, this soft, this whole. The years that followed built themselves slowly, the way a good life does not, in single dramatic moments, but in the steady accumulation of small, ordinary joys. Sarah Grace grew into a girl every bit as opinionated as her mother, riding before she could properly walk, correcting her father's arithmetic by the age of 6, with a confidence that made Cole laugh until he had to sit down. 2 more children followed in the years after, a son James, quiet and thoughtful like his father, and a second daughter Ruth, who from her earliest years showed an interest in her mother's ledgers that suggested the trading post's future was already quietly being decided. Amelia expanded the store twice more over the following decade, and the schoolhouse she'd helped fund grew into something the whole territory eventually pointed to as a model free education for any child within riding distance, regardless of whether their family could afford tuition, a policy Amelia insisted upon, over the objections of exactly the kind of men who'd once questioned her fitness to hold property in the first place. "You've turned into something of a legend around here," Ethan told her one evening years into their marriage, watching her go over the school's finances at the kitchen table with the same careful precision she'd once applied to her father's ledgers. "Woman who beat Jonas Whitfield, built a school, ran a store, and raised 3 children who'd argue the sun wasn't up if you told them otherwise. I had help," Amelia said, not looking up from the ledger. "Considerable help from a man who once told 3 armed strangers to let go of my wrist and never once stopped standing beside me since." "Wasn't much of a choice," Ethan said, coming to sit beside her, resting his chin against the top of her head the way he had 1,000 times before. "Man doesn't walk away from something like you, not once he's seen what you're made of." Word of Whitfield reached them only occasionally in the years that followed. News that he remained in territorial prison, that an appeal had been denied, that he'd grown old and diminished behind bars, stripped of every advantage his money had once bought him. Amelia found each time the news reached her that it landed with less and less weight. The man himself shrinking in her memory, even as the life he'd tried to destroy grew larger, richer, more completely hers with every passing year. It was Sarah Grace, 15 years old, and every bit as sharp as her mother, who asked the question one evening on the porch that brought the whole story circling back around to where it began. "Mama," she said, "is it true you fixed your own wagon wheel the day you met Papa, before he even helped you?" "It's true," Amelia said, smiling at the memory worn soft and warm now by 2 decades of distance. 3 men had already come along and tried to take advantage of a woman traveling alone before your father showed up. I'd already decided I wasn't going to need saving from any of them. And Papa saved you anyway. Your Papa," Amelia said, glancing at Ethan across the porch with a warmth that had never once dimmed, "didn't save me. He told me I didn't need saving. Then he stood beside me anyway every single day since for reasons that took me the better part of 2 years of danger to fully understand." "What reasons?" Ethan answered before Amelia could, his voice carrying the same quiet certainty it had carried on a canyon road 20 years before. "Because your mama walked into my life saying she wasn't like other women," he said, "and I've spent every year since being grateful she was right." Sarah Grace rolled her eyes with the particular dramatic exasperation of a teenage girl who had heard this story 100 times and would happily hear it 100 more. "That's the most romantic and most embarrassing thing you've ever said, Papa." "Both things can be true at once," Ethan said, unbothered, reaching for Amelia's hand the way he had every evening for 20 years. "Same as being different and being loved were never opposites to begin with. Your mama taught me that." Amelia leaned into him, watching the sun sink low over land that had once been a battlefield and had become instead simply home, the ranch, the store, the school, the children, the whole unlikely hard-won life built out of a broken wagon wheel and a stubborn refusal to be anyone other than exactly who she was. She thought, in that quiet evening light, of every voice that had once told her she was too much, too stubborn, too outspoken, too educated, too unwilling to shrink herself into someone easier for the world to accept. She thought of Whitfield diminished now, to nothing more than a name in old newspapers, a cautionary tale told, to explain why the territory's land laws had grown stricter, a man who had once believed a woman alone would be the easiest target he'd ever find. He had been wrong about that, as he had been wrong about nearly everything. Being different had never been the weakness he assumed it was. It had been all along the very thing that had carried her through every danger he threw at her, and the very thing that had drawn Ethan Walker off his horse on a lonely canyon road 2 decades before. Certain from the very first moment that a woman kneeling in the dirt refusing to ask for help was worth stopping for. "Do you remember?" Ethan asked softly, as the last light faded gold over the hills. "What you told me that very first day?" "I told you I wasn't like other women," Amelia said, smiling. "And I told you," Ethan said, drawing her hand to his lips, "that's exactly why I needed you." She looked at him, at the life they had built together, stubborn and hard-fought and entirely, unmistakably their own, and understood with a certainty that had taken her a lifetime of proving herself to finally believe that he had never once wanted her to become anyone other than exactly who she already was. The rarest kind of love was never about finding someone who completed you. It was finding someone who looked at every difference the world had once called a flaw and saw instead a reason worth staying for. And on that quiet Montana porch, 20 years after a broken wheel had changed the course of 2 lives forever, Amelia Carter Walker understood at last, and for good, that she had never needed to become like other women at all. She had only ever needed to become fully and without apology herself.